Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and as always, I'm happy to have you here. Go ahead and subscribe to the show, share the episodes online, on social media, just repost, and send out emails and newsletters, and tell people about Keys to the Shop, because we have a ton of content that helps coffee shops run better, helps coffee shop professionals be better professionals. And we want to promote people first coffee shops and systems that promote the thriving of all people involved. And that's just good for coffee up and down the supply chain. So if you would do so, that would be amazing. Thank you so much. And also, if you are interested in coaching and consulting, Keys to the Shop offers one-on-one coaching and consulting for coffee shop owners who are looking to improve their operations through cafe audits, through one-on-one remote coaching that allows you to improve your operations, the culture, the quality and consistency of your product, as well as the workflow, and just kind of refine your business holistically. I've worked with many people over the course of the last better part of 10 years now that we've been running Keys to the Shop Consulting, and it's been such a joy to be able to contribute to the elevation of the product and the place and the people of these coffee shops. So if you're looking for somebody to help you one-on-one with coaching and consulting, then go ahead and reach out to chris@keystotheshop.com. Happy to have a conversation with you, and you can check the link in the show notes to do that as well. Now, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at the Pacific Food Service Barista Series. They have been doing this for decades now. They are the OGs in the space. They have an extensive lineup of plant-based beverages that are designed for baristas. And what that means is that when they research and develop and refine these things, they rely on the industry to tell them, is this working? Is it not? That's why it works, because it's a conversation with the industry that they're having. So that's why it stands up to the heat from steaming, creates great texture. You have great flavor balance. And I would encourage you, if you're looking for the best plant-based beverages, go to pacificfoodservice.com, check them out, get samples, and try it for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. Taste and see what it is all about. Do that today. If you're looking for a really great option for your plant-based beverages, try the Barista Series from Pacific. Now, I wanted to just quickly introduce you to our guest and then get you right to our conversation. We are joined by the legendary John Gordon, who is an industry-leading coffee professional who has almost 3 decades of experience in the coffee industry, spanning every facet of our coffee world. Now, he currently serves as the director of Silverback Coffee Solutions, which provides comprehensive coffee business consulting, project management, equipment design, roastery and technical services, and roasting training. Now, when I say that, this is a legend, obviously, 30 years in the coffee industry, you do some stuff. John is a 3-time UK Barista Champion, is a UK Latte Art Champion as well, and the 2018 New Zealand Barista Champion. He has also reached the finals of the World Barista Championships multiple times and has coached highly successful competitors, including World Barista Champion Sasa Sestic and the New Zealand Barista Champion from 2019, Dove Chen. So beyond the competition stage, John brings extensive technical expertise as a roasting technician and research and development specialist. His background includes serving as a production and innovation manager at Coca-Cola Amatil, New Zealand, and operations manager at Square Mile Coffee Roasters in London. He's held significant research and development consulting roles and at major equipment manufacturers, including San Remo coffee machines, Halo Caramali, where he managed engineering teams and directed 3D and mechanical design and built prototypes and implemented lean manufacturing principles that really come to bear in the way that his consulting works. I see his posts online are always very insightful. And John obviously has a lot of true expertise from hands-on technical work, finding what works and what doesn't, and then blessing us with that insight. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. So all that said, let's get right to the conversation. I'm so honored to have on the show today a conversation with John Gordon. Well, John, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, it's interesting to be talking to you now because I feel like I've followed your career, well, since you had a career, I suppose. And the competitions started pretty early for you, but I do remember you in competition days. Those were heady days. It must feel like quite a long time ago.
Literally a lifetime ago. It does feel like. I think my very first competition year was 2009. So that's a fair way back now.
That was those were the days where everything was somewhat in formation. The primordial soup of third wave coffee at that time, and it was really fun. And I think a lot of people from that point kind of found themselves saturated in virtually every aspect of the coffee industry, and at a certain point chose a direction. And I know that you've chosen the technical direction. You got into roasting and with Silverback Coffee Solutions. That's your primary focus, right? And this is the newest thing you're doing. But when you first started in coffee, what were your aspirations, if any? I mean, we all kind of came into it somewhat accidentally, maybe, but talk about the beginning of your career and how your mindset was then and how it shifted once you became aware of the options in coffee.
Yeah, I was coffee for me started in Melbourne, in Australia. It was very much, I don't know about accident, but it was a desire to get out of what I was doing. And I was in the security industry, and I was trying to change my direction into something that was a little bit more giving or giving back. Or it was, in security industry, it's very much you're on edge constantly, and it wasn't a very nice kind of environment, to say the least. And I was hungry for something, but I didn't know what. And my ex-wife at that point was in coffee, and I would go along to the tasting sessions and stuff like that. And it was one of those aha moments of, taste. I'm pretty sure this is almost like the same for everyone, right? Tasting an Ethiopian hurrah, and somebody had mentioned blueberries. And it was that moment of like, oh yeah, there's blueberries in that, and that for me kind of went, hang on, there's something here. There's something interesting, and I was very lucky to be offered a barista job with no experience whatsoever, and it was a big change from constantly I've been working nights for several years, and so going from that change to 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock morning, barista shifts, and it was enjoyable. It was a very different style of communication with customers, obviously, and there was a challenge there of doing something that I really didn't know what I was doing, and that was very much back in the day of, this was 2006-ish, 2005, 2006, of a couple of clicks on the old Mazda doser grinder, and scraping with your finger and back into the doser and things like that, and just kind of slamming things around, but there was something interesting there. And very, very early on, I remember asking the owner of it was a small cafe roastery, so there was a small Probat L12 in the back, with barely any room to roast coffee around it or anything. But it was a cool little shop, and I think I was very lucky to be exposed to really good coffee very early on, and the roasting process very early on, and. Yeah, I remember one day asking the boss, "Oh, can I ever clean this grinder thing out? Like, do you ever clean it or anything like that?" And she said, "No, she let me go for it." And I remember the first time I ever took a Mazda, I think it was a Super Jolly, apart. It took me like an hour and a half to put it back together. So, And then from that point, it was like, really, there is something interesting here. And yeah, really just the deep dive. My days off, I would go into, St. Ali in Melbourne had just started, had opened up then, and I would go in there on my days off and look at this crazy menu and order different coffees every time that I would go in there. There was this really nice spot beside the bar where you could see straight down the bar, and they were working on a very early version of Synesso. And I just saw this, weird and wonderful stainless steel machine that just looked amazing. And then watching this guy, be so attentive and pouring his latte out. And it was just so fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And it really drove that curiosity. So.
It's so funny, the third day in a row, blueberries and Harar has come up in my world. Tom from Sweet Maria has just put out a video talking about where did blueberry go, and I just commented on that. So I'm so glad you brought that back up. I guess it just shows how flavor is somewhat of the catalyst for all of us, and we're chasing some aspect of flavor in everything we do. Even, the technical and mechanical components of the work, and the sometimes the drudgery of what we do is all really to try to coax flavor out of coffee and deliver it to people to have more of those moments. So this fascination with this type of equipment and this part of the industry, what did you do next to start to actually learn about the insides of the machines and the roasting operations? What were your first steps into that?
It was very much consistently trying to shoehorn my way into anything to do with how things worked. Roasting, obviously the brewing side of it, I think, was a really, really big catalyst of that. I was like, right, here's a product that all the bits and pieces that you do affect what happens here. So what else affects that? And yeah, it was. I guess along the path, I was just very lucky to have people that were. Very happy to kind of feed my curiosity, because from moving from Melbourne to the UK in London, I was working for a big events company, and we would travel around the UK and Europe and set up little coffee bars, whether it was at expos and different events and all that sort of stuff, and then spend the day or a few days or whatever making coffee. And so the initial setup and breakdown of these setups were like, you really had to understand how things worked, because we were a lot of the time we were working off, we would have power and that's it. So we were working off water barrels and flow jet pumps, and so all of that sort of stuff really stemmed or really kind of pushed the curiosity further in, like, how do these things work and work well? And then accompanied with that, we did our own servicing. So I started servicing all the fleet of coffee machines, and some of them were, London water is not the greatest, so some of them were definitely worse for wear, and so a lot of that came down to like full strip downs and descaling boilers and rebuilding, and so it was just an exploration of, right, tear it down and then figure out how it goes back together, because there wasn't a huge amount of resources back there to be able to look at and understand what how things go back together or things like that. So it was just one of those discoveries of look at this thing, figure out how it works, And that's, I think that's that point of where I noticed that this side of coffee, like I can look at something once, I can look at a wiring diagram once, and it stays in there. But I always struggle with other things in terms of the coffee side of things. One of them I remember was, and I took into a barista competition routine was, and the reason I did it was because I wanted to understand and learn more about varietals, and I really struggled with that sort of stuff. But anything technical, it stayed in there. So yeah, the early days of struggling to get any documentation on whether it was wiring or hydraulics diagrams and things like that. So just pulling things apart, putting them back together, and trial and error, and the kind of same went for roasters as well. So and then after that, it was very much from that point I had started working with Square Mile when they first started, and James Hoffman was very much just kind of let me go crazy, really, in terms of figuring things out and understanding what needed to be understood. And we would do crazy experiments on the roasters, and there was one instance where there was no thermocouple on the UG15, ProBat UG15. It was very, and this was what I loved about learning how to roast, because we learned how to roast very manual, old school. And so we wanted to put a thermocouple in there, but we wanted to find the right place. So I had a crazy idea of, let's make a Perspex door, a plastic, see-through door, and run the machine cold, but put different, put green coffee in there, different sized batches, and see how it all churns and all that sort of stuff, and put, half roasted coffee in, or a full batch of roasted coffee in, and see how it all churns, and understand, visually how things kind of work. So, I was very lucky in that instance of have a crazy idea, and James would just go, yeah, go for it. And, we were looking after Senessos, and I got to work on, I was so blown away. I got to work on this machine that I very first, there was one of those first loves in coffee that I saw, that I used to go in and see in this cafe in Melbourne, and watch this barista make these amazing coffees on. I got to service them. I got to play with them. I got to see the new stuff that was coming out. I got to communicate directly with the wonderful guys at Senesso, and really developed a love for those machines as well. And that curiosity just kept on ticking over.
If it strikes me that in those days, because there was a lack of resourcing of these technical tools, and you had to get in there, the experimentation of folks like yourself probably lent to a lot of advancement, significant advancement, not only from competition stages, but just in the communication that you're talking about. Did you experience that as you had these conversations with manufacturers?
Oh yeah, there were, so the very early days of even just a hint of scales in an espresso machine. This was a real interesting one. I remember and this was obviously stemmed from people putting scales on a drip tray, and this kind of thing had just started. We were 2011 WBC. I was dialing in backstage with James, and we had scales on the drip tray, and people were looking at us like, "What are you doing?" Really not understanding what was going on. And after that, it was I had a nice workshop at the at Square Mile, and it was trying to figure things out of how does this stuff work? How does not just the machine work, but how do we? Because scales back then were not very robust at all, and so we were with our wholesale accounts. We were you got to have scales, blah blah blah, and do this, do that, and very much a kind of a swing in how we were doing things, or how the industry was doing things in dialing in coffee. And so I started talking with Senesso about like, how do we integrate this into a machine? And so started playing around with the ideas of how that stuff works, and then got wind of the one machine that Marzocco had built with Marco Beverage Systems, based on the Uber boiler, because we did a lot of work with Marco on the Uber boiler. That was one of James's little loves, and that was a lot of fun as well. Like the whole scale, weight-based delivery on water and things like that. So I started playing around with, again, back then, like, not a huge amount of resources. I'd start to play around with small, development kits, Arduino, things like that, and try and figure out how to program a small board for a load cell, and how to read weight and things like that, and how to integrate that into the machine. I feel like that was a real big pivotal point in coffee in terms of integrating these things into machinery. And I remember there was one day before the T3 system for Simonelli got released, myself, James, and Laura from Simonelli were in the training room at Square Mile, and we had T3, and we were doing all of these tests on trying to change all the different temperatures and things like that. And I remember saying to Laura, because I'd been reading as much as I could about how a load cell works, and had one of those moments, kind of penny drop moments of, right, the load cell and a flow meter, essentially the signal that they put out works the same. So it said to Laura, like, could we not just take the flow meter out and put the load cell in place of that, and obviously convert the signal to what information we need to. And so that, again, kind of spurred that next level of how these things go. And so I went through a whole lot of, I've still got loads of like old designs of how to integrate the load cell into a machine. And so those kind of progressions and innovations that we saw in coffee early on were very, I feel like they were done hard. Like the processes were a lot longer than now. I feel like we can develop things a lot faster than back then. So it was a very tricky way of having to do something. I feel like we can do a lot easier now.
Is there an advantage to having gone through the resistance and the difficulty and the constraints in the way that it develops a certain kind of flavor of curiosity that's a little more sustainable and sticky through your career versus, I know you can only speak to your own experience, but it does seem like, if you did go through that, it changes you and is maybe more beneficial in how you approach the technological ease that you have today, but with a little bit more of a backbone of experience and deep understanding that you really couldn't get if you just read a manual. Putting yourself in that situations you were in, you understand things a lot more deeply. What kind of advantages do you think that has even today?
I mean, and I always say this to roasters or to people, learning how to roast specifically. Like I learned how to roast very manually, and learned the ins and outs of vintage machines that had very little on them, and understanding things like thermodynamics on a vintage machine. Those kind of things, I know without a doubt, made me a better roaster. And the same goes with the espresso machines and the grinders. Like getting that fundamental understanding of how your equipment works can only better the output of what you're trying to produce with that machinery, because you get so in tune with the equipment that no matter how much technology you can kind of throw at something, you have the advantages of knowing the intricacies of a piece of equipment to know what will work or what won't work to dial in a coffee, whether it's dialing in a roast or dialing in a espresso or a brew or anything like that. Like it's without a doubt, like I know throughout those years, like of competition specifically, of understanding how a machine worked and how a grinder worked, no matter what was thrown on stage in terms of like the sponsorship, equipment sponsorship and things like that. I was like, doesn't matter what machine it is. I know the ins and outs and I know what I need to do to combat these certain things. So there was a huge advantage there, because then it got to a point of like seeing a lot of other roasters, for example, trying to, or people coming in wanting to roast, and, you know, the early days of Cropster and things like that, and where people were learning from a graph, and those days where, and it happens, happens with software crashes, right? And those days where Cropster would crash and something would need to be updated or something like that, and but it would crash mid-roast. And I would see people like, they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So you can't, just because the technology doesn't work, but the machine itself is still working, you can't just stop production because Cropster is not telling you what you need to know. So we on the roasters, we used to have a plug for the thermocouples, so that when things did go wrong, you just plug it into a fluke device and still read your bean temperature. So at least you had something, you had a timer and you had your bean temperature, and you still had the old analog gauges on the roaster, and that was a big difference to me to see. This generation of roasters coming in, only knowing how to roast with technology, and so when something doesn't go right, everything goes out the window, and it's so. On the back of that, when teaching people how to roast, I try my best to teach them how to the basic fundamentals without the technology. Understanding the machinery and understanding the ins and outs of how airflow works and how heat works, and I feel like the more you understand how the machine actually works, the obviously the better your coffee is going to be, but the easier it is that you're going to be able to do things. No matter what the scenario is, you need to go and roast somebody somewhere else because your roaster broke down or something. You should be able to jump on another machine, a different brand, a different type, and roast coffee. You can't spend days learning how to roast on a new roaster. So definitely the advantages there. I feel like I can jump on any roaster, within one or two batches, understand what that roaster is doing, and roast a really good batch of coffee. The same goes on an espresso machine or a grinder. On a grinder, a couple of doses, and understanding anything from the noise to how the coffee looks and things like that, how to work that grinder or how to work that espresso machine. So,
yeah, it kind of brings to mind this idea that we're striving to make innovations to make some things easier, but almost the obligation that people have been in the game for a while, you and I have been in the game for a while, is to pass on the wisdom as well as the innovation. And the same thing goes for cafes, where if you're managing through a manual, but you don't know how to have conversations with people, it's probably not going to be the best management moment for you, because we don't have an SOP for that. But you do have a conversation, and maybe you develop something that helps you, but it's not a replacement, it's an aid for people. So earlier you mentioned, there were things that came more natural to you, and things like the mechanical and the technical was more natural, and then challenging yourself to understand the coffee part of the equation. That was a challenge. And I imagine, having taken on that challenge, it made you better at technical and mechanical things. I mean, this is what they do. They make coffee. They're designed to do this. So what could you say, for yourself at least, that pursuit did to benefit your career in not just roasting, but equipment and technological services? Why is it important to get the taste and the skill of the making and the coffee itself?
with everything that I learned on the technical side of things, I think a big thing that I learned, and this would only be probably in the last 10 years, was that there wasn't necessarily, as a raw product, I don't feel like there's really super bad coffee. I feel like what's happened in our industry is that through the processes that we do, whether it's roasting, whether it's brewing, we actually ruin coffee more in a roundabout way. So, like, there's been instances where I've been working with somebody, consulting or a company, big companies, small companies, whatever, and they wouldn't be happy with what they think is their raw product that they're starting with, and they want to improve that.
Yeah.
But looking at profiles, that technical side of things, and understanding how a coffee is roasting, and seeing those small intricate details in a profile, or when actually roasting the coffee, certain smells and noises and things like that, and then putting that on a cupping table, and then reworking that with a client, with a customer, with some improvements, and showing them that it's not necessarily the raw product that they're working with, it's the processes that they're doing that has more effect on the flavor. So, like, I've done cupping tables with people where they didn't even realize it was their own coffee that they had, and so it's kind of a really interesting situation where they're very adamant that these cups that they're tasting are not the same coffee. And I think showing people that through that technical understanding and that technical development and implementing, different structures onto a coffee and how that affects the flavor, and trying to get people to identify, I guess, what I would call roast defects that are not necessarily a defect in the coffee itself, but a defect in the process. Yeah. And trying to get people to tune into, I guess, that combination of where the coffee sits and where the roaster sits as well, and where those two combine to be able to produce a good tasting coffee. I feel like for me, one thing has fed the other, and then it's constant backwards and forwards. The tasting the coffee, and then being able to go back to the equipment, whether it's the coffee machine or the roaster, and change things, and then understanding the equipment more and doing something else, and then tasting the coffee again. It's that constant backwards and forwards where I feel like they just feed each other endlessly. So that's driven me, I feel like, in the last 10 years to, like, I love what I do. And I love that I get to be able to play on both sides of coffee, because it just, there's always that new discovery, whether there's a new discovery about coffee, whether there's a new discovery about the equipment. So it's just constantly feeding this never-ending thirst for knowledge of coffee, really.
It strikes me as you describe this that the person who understands those things, even though we all go through moments where we have to solve a problem that we're presented with, it's easier to solve that problem when you can eliminate one thing as a variable, where you can at least control for it, and enough to control for it. But if you don't, then everything is just the problem, and you can't address everything. You've got to find, if it's the coffee, if it's the equipment, if it's maybe there is something in the roasting process, but you would do well, it seems, to develop a deep bench of knowledge that's well-rounded in your roastery, to be able to bring those multiple facets of understanding the issue. And I think a lot of people do that, But then it does strike me that I think a lot of knowledge is siloed. Very, very much like you said with the graphs and everything else. Like somebody is a very specialized technician in one thing, but when something comes to present itself outside of that speciality, then I don't know, ask that guy or whatever. So I don't know if it's too much to ask that there's more. Is it being a generalist or just a well-rounded coffee professional? But how do you counsel people when they're trying to develop internal, like institutional wisdom and knowledge within their roasteries that's going to help them? How do they effectively pursue that?
Like I know that not everybody needs to have an extensive understanding of engineering or anything like that. It's not so much about that, but it's definitely like if you're working with a piece of equipment every day, you got to understand the fundamentals of what that equipment does. Otherwise, you especially nowadays with a lot of the automation with roasters, like you're just pushing buttons, and yeah, when something does go wrong. And what I'm seeing a lot of nowadays is production stops. And so I think and what I try to teach people, do small sessions with people in terms of like, preventative maintenance and things like that. So basically take them through the fundamentals of how a roaster works. And then and within that, all of those little cleaning and small maintenance parts that a roaster I feel like should be able to do the basics and understand the key points of each part of a roaster to at least be able to, when a problem does come up and someone gives me a call and this is going on with the roaster, blah blah blah, it's like, right, what is this doing, what is that doing? And if they can't understand or if they don't know the basics of the machinery, then it's a lot harder to feedback that information to somebody that can help you. I remember very early on of my early kind of technician days of looking after espresso machines, somebody would call and something's happening with the machine. It's like, right, what is this gauge doing? And the barista's telling me, I'm asking what the steam gauge says, but they're telling me what the brew gauge, it's sitting at 9 bar. So there's those real kind of small basic details. And again, you don't have to be an engineer to understand these things or even just to know these things and what these fundamentals do, for each piece of equipment. So for me, it's key to be able to emphasize to people working on a roastery floor, whether it's packing equipment or a sealer, those basic things of that your staff need to. You don't need to be a technician, but you need to know, this does this to be able to get you this. And so, that's where you mentioned before about SOPs. That's where those kind of things are so handy to have documented, especially, I can tell you now 100% from experience, especially with vintage equipment, having processes documented, especially for regular maintenance and things like that, where somebody can come in and, they're, a fresh hire and they might not have worked in coffee at all or might not have worked in a roastery, but they should be able to look at a playbook and know step by step how to be able to execute something. So SOPs end up being so valuable in what we do, and then that way people can actually learn on the job while they're going, and then things still get done, things still get looked after, and you can put inside those SOPs little explanation blurbs of certain bits and pieces so that people can, if they want to, go away and learn a little bit more about that particular aspect of the equipment. But I think what I find that I'm doing more and more now is teaching people more in depth detail about how, whether it's workflow, whether it's the roasters, whether it's a sealing machine, whether it's a packing machine, whether it's a vacuum system, all of those little bits and pieces of like trying to basically, take them on a journey of understanding it rather than just telling them this is how this is done, or this is what you've got to do here. It's like, you got to do this because, or at least getting them to ask the question, why are we doing this? You're doing it because of this. You got to do these things. You got to clean out the filter for the vacuum system, otherwise you're not going to be able to vacuum up any coffee. So really getting into as much detail as possible without going into too much high technical detail.
Yeah. And it's kind of fighting against the urge to just assume that things are going to be fine. If you don't know the why or the urgency of what's behind this practice, you might leave it because it's overwhelming. You might, if you're running a business, you've got a lot of different things calling for your attention. And learning the why behind the what allows you to at least not write that off as something you can do later. Because, if you just want to break it down to how much money you're going to save by not having something burn or explode or break, then great. But yeah, I think there's always room for detail that helps their future self make the right decision. Maybe if you're taking a class, if you're on the call with you or somebody that is telling you these things, you're going to nod your head and say yes. But it's really for the future you that's not fully attentive in the moment that we have systems. What do they say? We don't raise ourselves to the level of our ideals. We fall to the level of our systems. And that's so true. One of the things I saw you write recently was about efficiencies in the roastery. And I think you were talking about lean as a concept. And I've, dabbled in some reading on it. I've got a Gemba Kaizen book somewhere in the library over here. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, like, with Silverback Coffee Solutions. This is stuff that you're obviously helping a lot of roasteries with as they want to set up to be efficient, especially as costs go up. Competition is at an all-time high. So any kind of marginal gains they can make are going to make an exponential difference. So walk us through your philosophy about roastery efficiencies.
I think, and first of all, like, this was introduced to me by Paul Stack from Marco Beverage Systems. I was lucky enough to, in that era of doing bits and pieces on the Uber boiler and things like that, I would go over to Ireland and spend some time with those guys. And Paul introduced me to lean manufacturing as what they were implementing within Marco. And I was lucky enough to then practice that at Square Mile, like really rearrange and change everything and do time and motion studies and things like that. So, it kept on going. I think the efficiencies nowadays, like how, and I've had to do this the hard way. Instead of back in the day, the hard sell was you should do this because you're more efficient. Or you should do it this way because it would be more efficient. But now actually putting these kind of things into spreadsheets and showing people financially what that efficiency means is now key. Like it's absolute key. And like you said, everybody is, costs are going up across the board, not just green coffee, but all of our costs are going up and kind of really blowing things out of the water. And everybody is, I can see everybody's looking at, right, how do we reduce our costs, or how do we save money here and there and things like that. Whereas, I've looked at some roasteries where, they might be doing one batch an hour on their roaster. And mind blowing. Wow. And when you put that on a spreadsheet and show somebody their per kilo price from doing 1 batch an hour to minimum three, hopefully 4 batches an hour on a roaster. And what that means is just one of those first kind of stepping stones of understanding, rather than cutting costs or cutting processes and things like that, is like understanding how those efficiencies actually affect your bottom line. So, obviously an extremely inefficient roastery is going to have a hell of a lot smaller margin, but it's a lot harder to see how those margins are affected unless you are doing things like time and motion studies and understanding how long each process takes, and what's factored in with those costs as well. So it's not just labor; it's energy, it's your rent. All of those kind of things factor into the inching away at the margins that you have.
Weirdly, in my life, I developed a green coffee allergy, which is bizarre. But roasting would have been a bigger part of my life had it not been for this thing. But I did take a roasting 101 course at Mill City, and one of the exercises was to have these cutouts that are scale model cutouts of roastery implements, and to move them around and, as a team exercise, to find the most efficient way to lay out a roastery. And I as a consultant for coffee shops myself, and we do this with coffee shop layout, people really, really want to design something very quickly without going through that process. For some reason, that feels like we're back in school. And maybe that's it. Maybe it's the past trauma of school. But how do we do these studies in... let's say you're a roaster and you want to do a time and motion study. Do you want them to map it out and sort of walk through the process, different touch points, like a spaghetti map and this kind of thing? How does it work to do it practically?
I think practically stopwatches are super handy. You can pretty much... I find if you can... just simple spreadsheet, simple piece of paper, a stopwatch, and that stopwatch goes with the product from start to finish. And each person stops, starts, and documents certain time on a product, and just a basic understanding of how long those processes take to start with, or how long the path that the product takes to go from green to a bag or to the customer even, it is quite interesting. But also, how much time are you? I almost think that things like a little chess clock or something like that would be handy in terms of a chess clock at each station. So stop, start when you walk away and things like that, because human motion is also a big inefficiency as well. Watching somebody, walk backwards and forwards 10 meters each time to do one particular task, and how much time that takes is a big killer. So I think, getting, and this is the biggest, I think it's one of the things that most of those methodologies really kind of emphasizes is you got to have everybody on board with at least trying to understand the process. If you've got one person within that whole team that has no desire to improve anything, or no desire to learn something new, or to learn how the process works, then it kind of breaks everything down. Everybody's got to really be on board of at least trying it, and the best way is to get them to understand the whys. So understand why you're doing it, and how that affects every day-to-day interaction, not just the financial side of it, but how does it affect the day-to-day interaction? If at the end of the day, you're absolutely destroyed physically and mentally, and the mental load of doing certain tasks in a roastery. Then I feel like there's something not right there. I remember at one point I calculated when I was a production roaster, I was lifting 1.5 tons of green coffee, 1.5 tons of coffee a day, between weighing out green, blending, all that kind of stuff. Like, that was insane. And so it's things like that, those kind of metrics where you don't think about it when you're doing it, but understanding what those metrics are. And I would hope that at the end of a roasting day for the whole production team, not just a roaster, at the end of a week for a production team, that everybody's enjoying what they're doing, and it's done through minimal effort, because I don't think it should be a huge effort to be able to work or run a roastery. So, and understanding and talking to the people that are, if it's a production person, if it's a roaster, if it's a logistics person, it's understanding what are the things that annoy them the most. Like, they need to have the input of the processes that they're doing day to day. They need to have a bit of a say in what goes on, because they're the ones that have to deal with it every single day. If there are these, one or two things that absolutely annoy them or take way too much time every day, then they need to be addressed. So, having those times to be able to communicate with the whole team and understand where the bottlenecks are, whether it's physically, mentally, or other, and what actions can be taken to be able to improve them on a daily basis. So,
sounds like a very engaged boss to be able to do this.
I think so, yeah. You need to be, and this is where, like, anything that I've ever done, I've always gone, right, where is the starting point at this thing? I want to be there, and I want to do every single process physically and mentally myself to be able to understand everything. So I feel like a good leader, a good boss, is somebody that will have done, or will at least be willing to do the job that they're expecting somebody else to do. Mm-hmm. It just understanding, how many bags can you pack per minute, is you need to kind of have that understanding before you can start implementing procedures. If a packing machine can only pack or can only produce 6 bags per minute, you can't expect somebody to be able to go, I want you to hit 8 bags per minute. So the understanding from higher ups needs to filter down as well of like the realities of what should be and can be expected, and how that can be implemented in a realistic way. The same with roasting. You can't expect somebody to be able to punch out 6 batches an hour if that's just not possible on the equipment side of things. And then that kind of filters back to understanding the equipment again. And, right, does this equipment actually suit our needs? Yeah. Are we producing too much coffee to be able to pack on time? Is it taking 2 days to pack 1 day's production worth of coffee? So, understanding the equipment throughput, understanding the human aspect throughput of like what is physically possible from the human perspective, what is physically possible from the equipment perspective as well, and matching those things up. So, everything from equipment to time and motion studies of your current layout, and kind of marrying them all together as a team, I think is really key.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. And there's so much about reasonable expectations and even having margin, because if you try to push it too much, of course, you might affect the quality of what you're doing. And, a big fan of the idea, it sounds like this is what we're talking about, where we replace productivity just as a word, which is kind of amorphous, to what degree, unto what, with effectiveness. We're going to affect the goal that we have, if you have a goal, and you're effective in it, you don't need to do, if you can do more, it doesn't mean you need to do more or fill all available spaces with things if what you're doing is working, but you would have to study the way that you're describing and be, when we started talking, you talked about this insatiable curiosity that you had about things and how they worked. And I feel like if we could just get a little bit of that regarding our businesses, regarding the roastery, boy, there's a lot of things that would change.
Yeah, definitely. It's and I think you see that with a lot of businesses where there's the lack of curiosity of how something functions. It's hard to really know, or it's hard for that person or people to know how to really run that business effectively. If there's that, a real lack of understanding of the whole process, then everything else breaks down. It even goes on to manufacturing equipment as well, because that's where, like, the lean bits and pieces for me was more so obviously started with the equipment side of it. Did a little bit on the roastery side of it, but more so on the equipment side of it. So it was really interesting to understand how that all ties in together, with not just the physical side, but everything else going on in the admin side. So purchasing, things like that, how all of those things get affected throughout the whole process of a business, whether it's big or small. And in coffee roasting, you can put that down to obviously green purchasing and your bags purchasing, boxes, all that kind of stuff. Like it all factors into to really creating a sustainable business.
Yeah. So, final question for you, John, and forgive me if it's a big one, but it has to do with the state of the industry and of coffee. But from your perspective, I mean, you've been doing this. You've been elbow deep in the equipment and the roasting and consulting competitions. You've done it all, literally. And now looking out at the landscape and helping people and seeing behind the scenes of so many businesses from your vantage point, what brings you the most hope for the future of coffee roasting and coffee retail?
I think what's really interesting is, I guess, the accessibility to be able to do more products rather than just roasted coffee. Like the accessibility, I just find it really interesting, the accessibility to things like, people doing pods now, the little drip bags, instant coffee, all of those kind of things I find really intriguing. And it's interesting to see how people are starting to diversify in the kind of products that they produce. So I think I hope that what we can see more of is roasteries understanding that they can produce more. It's not a huge range of products. RTDs, cold beverages, things like that. All of those kind of things I think are really interesting in terms of the accessibility nowadays. But I mean, the state of the industry, I think we are in an unusual era of we have probably a higher percentage of experts, and I would say kind of inexperienced experts in the industry, and a very low level of actual kind of experienced specialists in coffee. And it's kind of, and you can see this going back to what I was saying earlier about the, roasters not being able to roast without a piece of software. I think we've done this to ourselves in terms of kind of going a little bit too far on the technology side of things and fast tracking people in certain areas where there's no need to fast track. Like learning fundamentally. I feel like a lot of fundamentals nowadays are just thrown out the window, which is pretty sad. But the I don't know. I mean, I'm in two sides of the state of our industry right now in terms of those positives and negatives. But you know, there's definitely the huge positives in I see anyway in terms of the technology and automation, and there are great positives there. There, you know, the batch brewing espresso. I'm really intrigued about that at the moment. Have been for about a year or two in terms of and reproducing that. There's a young guy, Kirk in Melbourne, actually doing some pretty cool things, which I absolutely love that stuff, and got me thinking about, you know, how can you produce actually, rather than pulling lots of shots, how can you produce that kind of high concentration of coffee for that process? But those kind of things I find intriguing, definitely positive for the industry. The other side of it is we've created this era, this, you know, persona of these experts in the industry that are just ill-equipped to really push things forward. So I feel like innovation, in a way, in some form, has continued to grow, but also at the same time, the innovation is really kind of been halted by a real understanding of coffee in general.
Yeah, interesting. I think, those challenges probably produce some opportunities for other people to come along and make up for what might be lacking in the inexperienced expert category. We'll see, but yeah, it's well put. But John, man, we could talk so much more. This is the unfair part about podcasting, is you talk to people with decades of experience for 1 hour. But I know you write, you know, and you've been writing more frequently, I think, on LinkedIn and elsewhere. So I would love for people to get plugged into your network and your world of thought through Silverback Coffee Solutions. So tell us a little bit about where we can stay plugged into all things John Gordon. Instagram seems to be my kind of go-to at the moment, which obviously posts on to Facebook and then through LinkedIn. The _John Gordon for Instagram, and a lot of these posts lately I'll turn into larger articles. The idea is to kind of get the kind of the sparks happening, and then to be able to turn it into something a little bit more in depth for people to read. So it's honestly it's only been the last couple of years where I feel like I found a bit of a niche in what I can produce, and so now I want to really put that into practice and share as much as I can of the, you know, the experience that I've developed over the last couple of decades with as many people as possible. Yeah. Grateful for that. And people can work directly with you through your company too. So I guess
yes,
just is this silverbackcoffeesolutions.com?
No, so I need to change that actually. Okay. Guerrilla Gear. So I used to make burrs as well. So guerrillagear.coffee is a website, but or people can message me through the social media platforms as well. Yeah, so for consulting, whether it's designing new products, roasteries and roaster training and things like that. Yeah.
Got it. Well, thanks, John. It's really an honor to have you on the show. Great to get to know more of your story and your thoughts on coffee. It really is valuable to talk to somebody with this kind of depth of knowledge, and just grateful for your work.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Chris.
All right, everybody. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation, and a huge thank you to John Gordon for joining me on the podcast. And as usual, I think that when you listen to a podcast like this is the way I do it personally, but I like to go back and just re-listen to something and then maybe pause it and really think about how it is you can take what was said. If it resonated with you a little bit, there's more there to explore. So think on it a long time and consider, what can I do next in my roastery or in my coffee shop or my coffee business from what was said, and take action today. If it's like Sean was talking about, time and motion studies, so huge. Just even before recording this, I was on the call with a client who's building a coffee shop. We're looking through the layout of a kitchen and a coffee shop, cafe set up in the front of house, right? And instead of just saying, well, I think this goes here and I think this goes there, we have to go and play it out and kind of draw lines and, okay, this person is going to move here. They're going to touch that. They're going to fill the bag, or they're going to make the drink. They're going to reach for this product. And as you go through, you start to see, like John was talking about, spaghetti maps and these time and motion studies to find out where wasted energy is. Efficiencies are really important to preserve energy, to reallocate energy to other things. Maybe it's more production, or maybe it's something in the front of house in a coffee shop. It is that engagement with the customer. Sometimes baristas are very tired for reasons that are not just built into the business. They are because the business was not built correctly. And so we can avoid all of that if we do things like what John was suggesting. But that comes from a place of having been there, done that. Someone like John knows the internal components of the roasters so well. He knows the flow of a roastery so well that intuition comes into play. That's wisdom. That's true wisdom. And we should all strive to deepen our understanding and our expertise through actual experience, hands-on, with the thing, with our teams, with the people, with the process. We talked about Gemba. The taking a walk is what it translates to. Gemba Kaizen is a great thing to look into. And I just love this kind of, there's so much more we could talk about if we didn't have the, like hour-long conversation structure here. It could have been, 3 hours, but I don't know if that would be efficient, right? But what you should do is check out John's website. It's gorillagear.coffee. That's the home of Silverback Coffee Solutions. Check out the equipment, the services, and if you want to follow online on social media, it's _John Gordon on Instagram. So between the website, gorillagear.coffee, and at _John Gordon, you are all set to tap into a lot of great coffee wisdom. Again, huge thank you to John. If you have any questions or comments about today's episode, go ahead and send them my way, chris@keystotheshop.com. And by the way, always feel free to make comments under the Instagram posts and LinkedIn and wherever, because that's how we keep the conversation going. But definitely, if you want to talk to me directly, chris@keystotheshop.com. It's a great place to go. And with that, I'm going to say farewell. Thanks, everybody, so much for being here on the show. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.